The bright lights in the big, fancy room made everything shine. A young woman named Karoline Leavitt, who was just 27 years old, walked in and sat down at a table. She worked at the White House, helping to talk to the news people for the president. Her blonde hair was tied back nicely, and she wore a neat navy blue jacket. The table and chairs were made of shiny, dark brown wood. Just a little while before, an older lady named Margaret Calloway came into the room. She walked in with a group of people behind her, looking very serious. Her eyes were sharp, and she had a small, proud smile on her face. She looked straight at Karoline like she was ready for a fight. Margaret stood up and said loudly to the room full of people, "Today, we're going to show the truth. Karoline Leavitt is just saying things that aren't real about the economy. She won't be able to prove anything." The room was full of people. Some were clapping for Margaret and nodding their heads. These were the people who agreed with her. Others, mostly from the other political side, looked nervous. They weren't sure what was going to happen next. Karoline didn't look scared at all. Her blue eyes stayed calm. She carefully moved her papers around on the table. She knew this was a very important moment. Margaret Calloway had been in politics for a very long time, over 40 years. She wore fancy clothes and acted very sure of herself. She thought she was going to make Karoline look silly in front of the whole country. But something surprising was about to happen. In the next 3 minutes, everything would change. And many people watching would be shocked. Margaret thought she had a big plan that would trick Karoline. But Karoline had something with her that no one else knew about. She had secret papers with real facts on them. Before we get to that part, let's learn more about Karoline Leavitt. Karoline was not a regular worker. She had already done some really big jobs, even though she was so young. She was the youngest person ever to be the main press helper for a group of Republicans in the House of Representatives. She came from a normal family in New Hampshire. Her parents weren't rich, and she knew what life was like for regular people. That's why she cared so much about helping them. Some people didn't take her seriously. On TV, one person even said she was just a kid pretending to do a grown-up job. But Karoline was smart and strong. She never gave up. Across the room, Margaret Calloway sat calmly. She was 84 years old and had been working in politics for decades. She was like a symbol of old Washington, D.C. power. She had nice clothes and acted very proper. Karoline had always said she wanted to challenge people like Margaret who had been in politics for too long. Margaret had set up this big meeting on purpose. She wanted to make Karoline look bad on TV. She wanted to show that the president's team was lying about how good the economy was. She said the people had been tricked too long. She thought this was her chance to win big. Margaret stood up to speak. Her voice was loud and strong. She said, "This government has not been honest with people about jobs and prices. Today, Miss Leavitt will have to explain all these lies with real facts." I don't think she can do it. The room felt like it was full of electricity. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen. This wasn't just about numbers, it was about trust. If Margaret could embarrass Karoline, it could hurt the whole team that Karoline worked for. Cameras moved around the room. They showed the difference between the two women. Margaret was older, fancy, and confident. Karoline was younger and calm, but she seemed like she didn't stand a chance. The hearing started. Margaret went first. She walked to the front and began her speech. She wore glasses and read from her notes very carefully. "Miss Leavitt," she said with a small smile, "you say this government made the best economy ever. But people are paying more for food and other things than they have in years. How do you explain that?" The room went quiet. Some of Karoline's teammates looked worried. Would she be okay? Karoline leaned forward. Her voice was steady. "Madam Speaker, thank you for the question," she said. "Our government has helped create more than 2 million jobs in the past year. And unemployment is really low, only 3.8%. Margaret didn't let her finish. She waved her hand and interrupted. Miss Leavitt, don't give us boring talking points. People can't afford groceries. They need the truth. It was a power move. She wanted Karoline to mess up. Some of Margaret's team nodded happily. A news reporter typed quickly on his laptop, writing down what was happening. Then Margaret walked over to a big screen and pointed. "Let me show you something," she said. The screen showed a chart. It had lines going up, showing how prices were rising. "This is what people are dealing with," Margaret said. "Your government caused this." Karoline tried to talk, but Margaret stopped her again. "And about the jobs," Margaret said. She showed another chart. This one looked like the job growth started before this president even took office. The room was getting loud. People were talking and nodding. Margaret's side looked very happy. It seemed like she was winning. She read some quotes from old speeches Karoline had made. She made it sound like Karoline had lied before. "You also said factory jobs were growing fast," Margaret said. "But the Federal Reserve's numbers say something else." She paused, then looked at the cameras. "People need the truth, Miss Leavitt, not fairy tales." Even more people online were watching. Social media was full of videos and comments. People said Margaret was doing an amazing job. But then, something strange happened. Margaret finished her speech and went back to her seat, looking proud. She thought she had already won. But Karoline didn't look upset. She opened a blue folder on the table in front of her. She still looked calm. In fact, she looked ready. "Madam Speaker," Karoline said. Her voice was clear and strong. "Thank you for your presentation. Before I answer, I'd like to share some documents." Margaret's face changed just a little. She looked surprised. She didn't think Karoline would be this calm. "Go ahead," Margaret said quickly, trying to stay in control. Karoline stood up. She smoothed her jacket and walked to the committee. Her high heels made a clicking sound on the floor. The room was very quiet. "Madam Speaker," Karoline began, "the charts you showed today were not complete. They left out some very important information." Everyone listened closely. "I have the full reports from the Federal Reserve from the last 16 months, she said. "They tell a very different story." She gave the papers to a helper, who gave them to everyone else. Then, Karoline pointed to the screen. Her assistant showed new charts. These ones showed factory jobs had grown by 4.2% every year. That was the most in 15 years. Margaret's face got tight. She looked down at the papers. Something wasn't right. The numbers were different from the ones she had used. But Karoline wasn't done. "Madam Speaker," she said, "you also talked about inflation. Let's look at that too." She took out another paper. This one had a seal that showed it came from the Congressional Budget Office, a trusted group that studies the economy. "This paper shows the full story," Karoline said. "Your presentation left out key parts." The room was silent. Everyone was watching now. The reporters were typing fast. Karoline had turned the whole hearing around. A Republican person in the government leaned forward in his chair. He asked, "Miss Leavitt, are you saying that the Speaker of the House's office told a lie about the country's money situation?" The room became very quiet. Everyone stopped talking. The cameras zoomed in on a woman named Margaret Calloway. She had a big smile on her face, but it looked frozen like she was trying to hide how surprised she was. "I'm not saying anything bad," Miss Leavitt said calmly. "I'm just showing everyone the full set of numbers. The same numbers every American family deserves to see." She turned and looked at Calloway. Then she said, "These numbers show that prices have gone down every month for the last 7 months because of the work our government has done." People in the room started whispering. Reporters started typing super fast on their phones. A Democrat quickly whispered to one of their helpers. Then came the big moment, the moment everyone would talk about for days. Miss Leavitt took out one last paper. It had a letterhead from the Speaker of the House's office, so everyone knew it came from Calloway's own team. It was an important paper that hadn't been shown before. Miss Leavitt held the paper up and said, "This is a note from the Speaker's team. It's only 2 weeks old." Her voice was calm and she didn't sound mean or excited, even though what she was about to say was a very big deal. She read from the paper, "The numbers about our economy are good, even though we've been saying something else in public. We suggest only talking about some of the numbers when discussing the economy." Suddenly, the room was loud. People were shouting. Republican members stood up and wanted answers. Reporters asked lots of questions. The man in charge of the meeting banged his hammer again and again, trying to make everyone quiet. The cameras caught the moment when Calloway realized something bad had happened. Her eyes got wide. She knew she was in trouble. The paper Miss Leavitt showed was real. Someone from Calloway's team had secretly given it to Leavitt. "When things got quiet," Calloway said, "people use parts of the data all the time in politics. That's normal." "Maybe," Leavitt replied. She looked straight at Calloway. "But the American people should hear the full story, not just parts." Then she turned and looked straight at the cameras. "The truth is, our economy is getting better. And our plans are helping regular people, even if others are trying to make it look like things are worse." The room got quiet again. But this time, it wasn't because people were scared or waiting. It was the kind of quiet that comes when something really big has happened and everyone is trying to understand it. This meeting was supposed to make Miss Leavitt look bad. She was young and not as experienced. But instead, she surprised everyone. She showed that she had done her homework and had the truth on her side. And the whole thing happened on live TV. Millions of people saw it happen. Very soon, the news channels were all talking about what happened. On social media, people were sharing the video again and again. Everyone was talking about the moment Leavitt showed the secret paper. On Fox News, the title said, "Calloway caught, Leavitt shows truth about the economy." Other shows also praised Miss Leavitt. One person on TV said, "This is the best comeback ever in a government meeting." Even news channels that usually support Democrats couldn't ignore what happened. CNN had a segment called "White House Worker Turns the Tables on Calloway." The New York Times wrote an article asking if the Democrats were being honest with people about the economy. The next morning, Leavitt was on TV again. This time, she was on a show called Fox and Friends. Even though she had won in front of everyone, she didn't brag. "This isn't about me winning," she said. "This is about making sure people hear the truth. That's how they can make smart choices for their families." The Democrats were in trouble. Calloway's office tried to explain the paper. They said it was just about how to talk to people, not about hiding the truth. But not many believed them. Reporters started to look closer at the papers Leavitt had shown. They found out the memo was real. And it really did show that someone in Calloway's team wanted to hide some of the good news. 3 Democrats who usually agreed with Calloway started to speak out. One of them said, "If we're not being honest with people about the economy, then we've lost our way." At the White House, the president heard about what happened. He called Miss Leavitt himself. Sources said he told her, "You didn't just stand up for our plans. You showed the country who we're really fighting against." Other people in the White House who thought she was too young to be important changed their minds. Now, they wanted to work with her and ask for her advice. People across the country liked what Leavitt did. They thought she was brave and honest. One grandma from Michigan called a radio show and said, "That young lady stood up for the truth. She used real facts, not just fancy words." We need more of that. Experts on politics began to talk about her a lot. One person said, "She's not just good at talking. She knows her stuff and isn't afraid to stand up to big names. That makes her a star." Calloway had made a big mistake. She thought she could embarrass someone younger and less experienced. But her plan had failed. Now, everyone was asking questions. If Calloway's team tried to hide this memo, what else might they be hiding? A week later, the reports Miss Leavitt showed were checked again. It turned out she was right. The economy was doing better. Manufacturing was growing the fastest it had in 15 years. And prices had gone down for 7 months in a row. People started believing the government's message again. Even people who didn't like the president before now thought maybe his plans were working. Most important of all, something big had changed in politics. Leavitt had shown that being real and prepared was more powerful than just being older or louder. The news about her kept growing. People started saying she might run for a bigger job in the future. Her social media accounts gained over 500,000 new followers in just 3 days. Fans called her the future. The memo became a huge deal. Shows on Fox News talked about how the Democrats had been hiding good news. One famous host called her the woman who showed America the truth. Even websites that usually agree with Democrats, like Vox, wrote stories about what happened. One article was called "How Democrats Lost the Economic Story." It said that even if people didn't agree on politics, hiding the truth was always wrong. And Leavitt had shown that very clearly. Calloway's friends tried to say that Leavitt was being dramatic. They said she was doing it just to look good. But the damage had already been done. Polls showed that people's trust in Democrats talking about money had dropped by 12 points. That was a big deal. Later, people found out that Leavitt had been working really hard before the hearing. She wasn't just lucky. She had been staying up late, studying every report, and practicing what she would say. She knew exactly what would happen, someone close to her said. While others thought she was too young to matter, she was working harder than anyone. More reporters began looking into how data was being used in other meetings too. One newspaper found that both political parties sometimes used only part of the data to make their side look better. But what Leavitt found was rare, proof that someone was doing it on purpose. Regular people across the country felt connected to what she did. They were tired of people in power only telling them half the story. They liked that Leavitt was honest and strong. In the end, Washington had made a big mistake. They thought Leavitt was too young to be important. But instead, they had helped make her a star. And all it took was one moment, one piece of paper, and one brave voice telling the truth. Social media was full of people saying things like, "Finally, someone is telling the truth about money stuff instead of playing games. This is why we need young people in charge. They haven't learned to lie yet." News around the world also talked about it. A big newspaper in London wrote about Leavitt and called her the new face of American politics. Another paper in Lyon talked about how this was a big change with younger people getting more power in Washington. Behind the scenes, the top people in the Democratic Party had secret meetings. They were upset. Calloway was very mad about a private note being shared and wanted to know who gave it to Leavitt. The party started looking for the person who shared it, but this made younger workers upset. They thought the party should care more about the truth in the note, not just who shared it. At the same time, Republicans used this chance to share their own ideas about money. They made a new commercial showing parts of the meeting and saying, "They hide the truth, we'll show it." In meetings about the country's budget, Republican leaders used the note to question what the Democrats were saying about the economy. The president also joined in. He tweeted, "Karoline Leavitt showed everyone what happens when Democrats have to face the truth. Our economy is doing great, and no one can hide that." Then, something surprising happened. A few big company bosses spoke out. A boss from a big factory company said Leavitt was right and that factories were really doing better. A boss from a tech company said fake charts like those in the hearing make people stop trusting the government. The most surprising thing happened 2 weeks later. A group of young people from both the Democrat and Republican sides started something new called the Economic Transparency Caucus. This group said they want to always show the truth about the economy to the people. They said what happened between Leavitt and Calloway made them want to do this. For Leavitt, the days after the meeting were full of both good and bad things. Lots of people knew her name now, but everything she said was watched closely. Some people who didn't like her looked through her old social media posts to find things she might have done wrong. But Leavitt stayed calm and kept saying the same message. When someone on CNN asked her if she felt proud about how people reacted, she said, "This isn't about me or Speaker Calloway. It's about if people can trust what they hear about the economy. I'll always fight to show the truth, even if it's hard." 3 months after the big meeting, the way people talked about the economy had changed. Before, people often made fun of the government's money plans. Now, they talked about them more carefully. Calloway was still important but seemed more careful when she talked about money. She often asked experts to speak instead of talking to herself. And for Karoline Leavitt, what could have been a big mistake turned into a big win. People started talking about her maybe running for Congress or becoming a big leader in the Republican Party. Whatever she does next, one thing is clear. In a time when many leaders try to control the story, Leavitt showed that telling the truth still matters. Because of that, she didn't just change her own future. She may have changed how people talk about money and truth in American politics. Thanks for reading this amazing story about how Karoline Leavitt surprised everyone and stood up to Margaret Calloway. If you liked this story about one of the biggest changes in Washington in years, if you liked this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling adventures, mysteries, and unforgettable moments. Your support keeps these stories alive and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching. I can't wait to see you in the next video.